Bruce Fenton. Again, my name is Skip Murphy, and as the sign says, welcome to your GrokGauntlet, which is our version of a newspaper's roundtable, except we ask far different questions, and we don't do softballs. We do not do gotchas, unlike George Hansel, who decided that we do. Well, too bad for George. This is what happens when you get, when you diss Granite Grok, we diss back. So since he got endorsed by Governor Baby Huey right off the bat, this is what he deserves. So, anyways, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And you know what we'll do is we'll just go round robin with questions, and when somebody falters, we'll just miss and wait for them to come back. And sometimes we have set questions, and sometimes we're just going to riff off of what you do.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to ask is, why are you running, and why, as a libertarian, are you running in the Republican Party, whose establishment wing of the party hates libertarians?
Yes. Well, I'm running because of where our world is right now. I think our world is in a very key place in its history. Every 100 years or so, we tend to have these big shifts in the way the world works, where borders change and money changes and systems change, who we trust changes. And I think we're going through that right now. And when these types of things historically happen, and you have this chaos and shaking up of systems, sometimes it turns out well for humanity, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes certain people do well and certain ones do not. And I think it's especially key right now that America gets this right. In other words, I think that in this shakeup of the craziness of the world, especially over the last couple of years, but you know, a long cycle of debt and a lot of other problems, but particularly this tyranny of the last couple of years, we have to make sure that we don't go down a path that continues that. We have to go down a path that embraces our values of our Constitution and human rights and liberty and freedom and the Bill of Rights. And so that's why I'm running, because I think it's a very, very key time right now, and I think we absolutely need people like me down there, and I think I can win this. Also, the timing of this particular election at this particular time, I think it's sort of meant to be. I can win it. And as far as why to do it as a Republican, that's exactly, you know, the name of the game, winning. It's very difficult to win as a libertarian. I identify myself as a libertarian. It's even in my literature and on my website. And I was registered independent up until fairly recently, a couple months ago, when I got into this process. But historically, I had been Republican. The few elected officials in Washington that I like tend to be Republicans, Liberty Republicans, people like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul. And the best example I can think of anybody in government that I model myself after is Ron Paul, who's obviously a Republican as well. So that's why I would like to see more libertarians win as libertarians. I would like to see more of a liberty wing of the Democrat Party, and I think the liberty wing of the Republican Party is quite strong, especially here in New Hampshire. But you know, nationwide we have a few good folks, so that's why I picked Republican.
Is there a liberty wing of the Democrat Party?
No, there's not a wing. There's a couple people that have slight glimmers of libertarianism, a tiny bit, but there's none that I know of, certainly not on a federal level, that are actual libertarians, and there's definitely not a wing. You gotta get one first, though. But there are some things that I think that the people on the left, this has to be a new movement by a new person, but you know, the young people are right about the problems in many cases on the left. There are Democrats who understand some of the problems. Even Michael Moore understands problems. His problem is that he just has really, really bad solutions in almost all cases. Sometimes he doesn't even understand the problem. But I would like to see somebody like, somebody get some of that energy that AOC has with the youth and just have good ideas, actually. And even some ideas that, maybe could fit with the Democrat brand. It's not a big priority for me or anything. I can't fix them. We do, fortunately, on the Republican side, you do have, even though it's a smaller group, it is a real wing, and you can find a home and find some people that share your philosophy.
Sir,
How would you, somebody talked about you being a libertarian, how would you distinguish libertarian positions from, say, the Republican, New Hampshire Republican platform?
There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of people who give lip service to sort of Republican ideals that are also libertarian ideals, like the Constitution, for example. I mean, I think the Constitution is one of the most unifying factors that Republicans have. You know, there's quite a few different types of Republicans. And, you know, so I think that, you know, less government, some of these things, you know, they've been sort of abused in the Republican Party a lot. You know, there's been a lot of, you know, very non-libertarian things. There's a lot of parts of the Republican Party and you know, things that the Republicans have done that I don't agree with. The wars are the biggest examples. You know, George W. Bush's wars. A lot of things that George W. Bush did, I felt were, you know, expansion of the state, things that I, you know, disagree with. So there's things that, it's not so much the platform. There isn't anything, I'd have to take a look at the official platform. There isn't anything that jumps out at me that I disagree with. I think that what we usually see is, at both the state and federal level, is Republicans who are, I mean, the term rhino is sort of misused too, because, or it's not a great term. I shouldn't say it's misused, it depends who's using it, but it's not a great term because it doesn't always differentiate, you know, why you think that. I prefer to use liberty as a litmus test, and there's definitely Republicans at the state and federal level who aren't following liberty, in my opinion. I can't think of a platform issue that I disagree with, but it's mainly like the implementation of liberty policies. You know, how most Republicans, locally and or you know statewide and federally, they just don't follow the Constitution. They don't follow these principles properly.
Well, I think I would agree with that.
Somebody else come in.
I've often said that the Tea Party decided to adopt traditional Republican principles because the Republican Party has abandoned them.
Right.
And the other thought I have every time I get an advertisement from a Republican Party that says, you gotta support conservatives, I say to myself, when did the Republican Party ever support conservatives?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, especially now, we have even guns. I mean, even guns are being abandoned by a lot of Republicans. I mean, gun rights, you know, and this tyranny of the last couple of years, where you have Republicans that sometimes stood by and sometimes supported this country. You know, where we had this unprecedented crackdown on human rights, unprecedented loss of our freedoms here at home. And there was Republicans that hated it or stood by and didn't fight it. So, you know, that I think is a violation of Republican values.
hi Steve.
Hi guys. Hello, how are you? Let me move over. I have trouble hearing anyway.
Okay.
You're soft
Hey
spoken.
there, I'm Bruce.
I made it.
Well, I'm glad. I made you the offer. I'd bring you over and bring you back.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Oh,
No, get back. My wife had to have a procedure up at down at Hitchcock.
Oh.
She got this damn ulcers on the bottom of her foot and edema in the left leg. Something
Have a seat.
fierce.
yeah.
Have a
Yeah.
seat.
Have a seat.
Have a
So,
seat. We're just starting the interview process.
hi,
Nice to meet you.
Steve Earle.
Bruce, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Glad to meet you.
Just so you know, Steve and Don are both fairly prolific letter writers to the local paper, what I refer to as Pravda on the Lake. But
Not
it's,
as prolific as I'd like to be.
well, yeah, you used to write a little more, but you
Well,
still.
they don't give us a lot of paper, do they? Well, it doesn't
No,
matter.
they call the Laconia Daily Sun, but I refer to it as Pravda on the Lake. They've definitely taken a left turn the past few years, and they've cut down the size of the letters that they permit now.
Oh, interesting.
And they've given you, like, you're limited to 1 a week and stuff like that.
One a week and 300 words.
Right.
Which is why I have expanded. We have granite grok,
Uh-huh.
but we also have what we call micro groks.
Oh,
So
nice.
we have one that was Guilford grok because there were,
Yep.
the three of us that would write for it. But I've now expanded it to Lakes Region grok. So for those people who want to write more, we need to get them to say, come and write for Lakes Region Grok. And by the way, Don is also the head of the Lakes Region Tea Party, which is one of the few that still exists. And Granite Grok was a co-founding member of the New Hampshire Tea Party Coalition back in the day.
Great.
And I'm one of the founders of the Concerned Citizens Group.
Oh,
Yes. So we consider ourselves political activists first that happen to have a rather large voice here in New Hampshire. We, as AFP New Hampshire has called us, Greg Moore, we punch well above our weight.
nice.
Because we are all volunteers. We don't have a payroll.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah. So.
Great for you.
Damn it.
Yeah, I know.
I want a raise!
No guest honorarium.
You're gonna double my salary?
Yep.
All right.
I love the math. 0 times 2 is.
That's
Is that the new
racist,
math?
isn't it?
What does Common Core have to say about that math?
Yeah, don't get me started. I'm trying to deal with the grandson's math classes in kindergarten, so I will have much to say about
Yeah.
that. But anyways, we are diverging.
So we were talking about platform, the Republican platform versus libertarian ideals and
Yep.
ideas. There are some things within the platform that are not exactly libertarian. There's positions dealing with marriage, there's positions dealing with abortion, which I think the libertarians, for the most part, as I understand libertarianism, having read a lot of stuff from Cato, but basically the government should stay out of some areas.
Yeah.
But the Republican platform has some areas that take positions that are probably not really libertarian. That being said, I have written for the Grok and elsewhere that you don't have to agree with 100% of the Republican platform, but pick a number, whether it's 70% or 80% or 90%. But if you get below 70%, as far as what you support and believe in, I think you're in the wrong party. You need to change parties. So I don't think you have to. I can see where a libertarian could be a Republican, could support the Republican platform generally, maybe not every little piece of it, but so that's something that you need to familiarize yourself with and be prepared to deal with. I don't know if there's going to be any campaign debates or anything like that, but some people may try to focus you on those issues.
Yeah.
You've already had a couple debates.
Yeah, we've had, there's been one, yeah.
At the Winter Journal.
Yep, a couple weeks ago or last week or something like that.
Yes. All right, let me ask you, one of the things I write about a lot, and I will admit to being what we call a conservatarian, conservative with small l libertarian leanings, because the more I study our early history, the more I come to appreciate the absolute genius. And of course, the Declaration of Independence, as I put this up as a blog line of the day yesterday. The Declaration has a specific ordering of what is to happen. Individual rights first, then government. And we're seeing that being, if not already, flipping. But here's what I want to ask. Because you'll be at the federal level, that's the topmost level of government, there are other levels of government. So I always ask the question, what is the proper role of government between all 4 levels? And this could be a very short answer or a very long answer. We've got plenty of time, and these cameras will last 10 hours.
Yeah, I mean, the proper role of all government, in my opinion, is to protect the life, liberty, and property of individuals, and that can sometimes include things like enforcement of contracts, and then there's a few sort of miscellaneous things like having embassies so you can have your visa work, so you can leave the country and come back, and things like that. But generally, that's what I'd like to see government limited to, protecting life, liberty, and property. So the legitimate roles of the federal government would be to limit itself and protect the people from the government, and in some cases limit the one relation between the different levels of government, which I think is relevant, especially here in New Hampshire. There's a thought, and there's kind of two schools of thought in the libertarian, or just two general theories that I you kind of can consider in this. One is sort of you have everything done on the most local level possible, where you have you have as little power at the federal level, and you delegate it to the states, and then the states delegate to the towns. The challenge with that, and I think what we saw in New Hampshire, is, in my opinion, one of the very few legitimate roles of, say, the state government is to protect you from other petty tyrants. So I think the state could do more to protect from, towns and school boards and things like that. And if there was cases where a state was abusing rights, I think it's good that the federal government stops the state from abusing rights. So basically the answer is, I want government limited to those roles and doing as little as possible. The one thing that I think is a legitimate role of government, and there's only a couple kind of bills that I would see myself being in favor of. Very strange circumstances where they're really needed, like a war. We get invaded, where I actually would vote. There are cases where I would vote for a war. If Rye Beach gets invaded, then there's certainly a chance that I would vote, for action on that. This kind of, bombing people all over the world, I don't vote for. So having those kind of, there's those cases, and then protection of life, liberty, and property. I would vote for things that deregulate it or decrease or get rid of agencies. And then the other thing I would vote for is something that protects, like if you had states that were, we have similar just recently. I mean, if you have states that are passing unconstitutional, violations of rights on firearms or speech or something like that, then I think it is the place of the federal government to stop the states from doing that. And that goes, by the way, for a state. I think it's the place of the state to stop abuses. I don't agree with the let's all do it locally kind of thing, because then you can have petty tyrants like school board members or town managers or something like that, where there's 70 people that got them elected, and they can affect thousands of people, and in some cases it's very, very difficult to fight them, and it's a burden for the citizens, it's a burden to get the lawyers and things like that. So I would like to see the government protect, if that answers your question about, in terms of how the levels of government.
From a philosophical standpoint, yes, but what about actual actions?
Mm-hmm.
Who should be doing what and why?
Well, the government overall, all the levels should be doing very little, and the reason why is because we don't need other humans to tell us what to do, to take our money and then tell us how to do something. If something needs to be done, it'll get done. We don't need government to do it in almost every single case. There's very, very, very little that government is actually good at, and there's almost nothing that they're better at than us collectively, especially in an era of decentralization and technology, where we can communicate and cooperate on the internet and through modern technology and other means. We especially don't need them. The only thing they're really good at and quite efficient at is killing, and there's very, very rare cases where that's warranted and needed. So the answer of what they should specifically do, mostly nothing. I'd like them out of our lives almost entirely. Very few roles that I think they should be doing at all. So the answer is I don't want to see government doing these things at all. If something needs to be done, the private sector will do it. If it's a good idea, you don't need government to do it. It'll happen. It'll work by itself. There's very, very little I'd like to see them do.
Yeah, my younger brother lived in a town where they outsourced every single function of the town to outside entities. Their staff was only basically project managers to say, we'll write the RFP, and then we'll monitor it, and if you don't do a good job, we'll fire you and get the next person. So it is a doable model. But I may come back to that later, because this is a philosophical question that I have spent a lot of time on over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Granite Rock's been open since 2006, so we've had enough time to tick off a lot of people. Steve,
Hello!
your question.
My question. Well, we see a lot of people coming into this country from all over the place. The group that I headed up concerned citizens, we focused our attentions on Islam. Now, I'd like to get your impression. Islam has a gentleman, Bob Ozzie, comes around frequently, giving presentations called Ask a Muslim Anything. And one of his presentations, or one of his points is that Islam is very well compatible with Western democracies. What's your thinking on that?
Yes, I think it is. It is a big religion. There's 2 billion people who are Muslims, and just like Christians or any other large group, they have an extremely wide range of what they believe. And we should always be very cautious of saying Muslims believe this or they believe that, because it is a huge, huge range. Just like Christianity, it's not just Protestants and Catholics who may disagree in Ireland or something like that. Christianity is much more broad than that. We have the Lord's Resistance Army of Uganda, who believes that you should chop off arms and things like that. Most Christians would say, oh, those aren't Christians. Just as most Muslims would say the Taliban is not, practicing the faith. The overall idea of Islam is submission to God and a belief in one God and only one God, and that the Prophet Muhammad is this messenger. And originally, when Islam was first spreading, it was considered by many to be a natural progression of Christianity and Judaism. And it was, one thing that a lot of people are not aware of today is that universally, Muslims believe that they believe in the same God as Christians and Jews. It's the God of Abraham. And they also believe in Jesus Christ. They believe in Moses. They believe in Noah. They believe in the Virgin Mary and the virgin birth. So there's more in common that people have with Islam than I think people realize. And I think it's absolutely compatible with Western ideals, depending on which interpretation. There's interpretations of Christianity that are probably not compatible, and there's certainly interpretations of Islam. I lived in Saudi Arabia. I do not agree with their it's obviously not a libertarian state. I don't agree that their method of managing the state and their method of state control is not something that I agree with. That is a different interpretation. There's different interpretations. There are certainly libertarian Muslims and others. And I think at the core, the 3 great religions all have something in common at their core, which is being against harming other people. And so in that respect, I think it can be very compatible with libertarianism. And, the West is a tricky idea too, because the West is, the United States already has millions of Muslims. It's already, it already is the West in some ways.
Yeah. What do you think, you're going more onto the philosophical. I'm thinking of the practical. What do you feel would be, how would it mesh? Instead of talking about just the different varieties of it, the basic ideology, how do you see that? Is that pretty much the same as our national government philosophy?
Yeah.
Is it pretty much the same as a Christian philosophy? Or is it, does it differ in a way that would possibly conflict with those? I don't mean violently conflict, I mean ideologically.
I don't think so. I think that it's naturally, I think Islam is peaceful, and I think that the core of Islam is often misunderstood by many people or misinterpreted or whatever, but I think that the Quran talks about you being peaceful to other people. So I think that is compatible. The Quran also talks about to your religion your own, my religion my own kind of thing. So it is accepting of other religions. And if you look back at the histories of Islam, you look at Muhammad's first society in Mecca. It was very opening. There was Jews there. There was, it's an opening thing. And Mecca historically had been a very vibrant cultural center because people came from all over the world and people were accepted. So and our system in the United States is a system that can be independent of religion. You can run for office and your religion shouldn't matter. Your beliefs shouldn't affect my beliefs, shouldn't affect and would not affect my actions. So yeah, I think it can be compatible for sure.
Don?
Well, I wasn't gonna go this way, but, in the United States, you could run for office believing in any religion. Of the, whatever it is, 57 Muslim countries, how many of them can you run for office and hold office as a Christian?
Well, of countries that
I don't know the answer, but I don't know of any.
yeah, I think that's a state problem more than a religion problem. It's an interpretation of a religion. We're a Muslim country in some ways because we have millions of Muslims. We're not there's countries that have a lot of Muslims that have not become an Islamic state. I think the countries that are Islamic states, Iran, Saudi Arabia, these kind of countries, then they are making their own interpretation of the religion and then extending that to the state. And not everybody agrees with that. Not all Muslims agree with that. And even those countries don't agree with each other. You'll notice, there's differences of opinions of those countries. I personally think that it is difficult to have a religious run state. Certainly impossible in America and impossible in our system. There's just all kinds of challenges with that. I think that our system is the better model. Let everybody do their own thing, believe what they want. And where I would, where the state comes into it is, it goes both ways too. You got to let everybody do their own thing, but also you can't let them try to make somebody do something. Like what you're seeing in the UK now is there's some people that are trying to push their religion. They say you should wear this or you should do this. Push their religion on somebody else. But if you violate somebody else's rights, that person needs to be protected. Everybody should be protected to do what they choose, what peaceful action they do. Now, if somebody wants to convince them, that's fine, but nobody should be forcing anybody to do anything.
Well, a couple of things I've noted is,
Round.
Hey,
round
I'm
robin,
sorry,
round robin.
I'm sorry.
I want to follow up.
I'm interested.
How about following up what's next? Because
Yeah,
he's
your turn.
just been sitting
I would
here.
argue that we do have religious state.
In the U.S.,
It's atheism.
we have a new religion.
Well,
Secular,
forced on
you will say
everybody.
secular human.
What I call it
but
is the Church of Woke. We have a new and rising religion, which is a real thing, and I think it really is very much like a religion in the sense that it has high priests and dogma and scripture
And altars.
guilt and authority, and you have to believe in invisible things. So there is this thing that I call the Church of Woke, which is partly atheist, partly almost evil in some ways. It's but it is very much like a religion, and I worry about that.
I want to come back to that point because it's something that we have fought with for a long time. Before it became woke, it was political correctness, and we can get into that. But Norm, your question.
My turn?
Your turn.
Well,
Since it is your house.
I'd like to turn to one of the favorite topics of mine, and I think of people in the Grok, and that's the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And what are your views about the Second Amendment to the Constitution?
Well, it speaks for itself, shall not be infringed. So I don't believe it should be infringed at all. So I'm against the National Firearms Act, which exists now. I would be in favor of repealing that. And
That was my next question. Would you repeal the National Firearms Act?
For sure. And I'd be against any and all regulations of any kind against firearms.
Good. That's good. I do have a second topic.
Biden's not going to like you if you think people could have a cannon.
Biden,
Why not?
Why not?
No, he says you could.
Letters of
Biden
marque.
won't like or dislike me
That's
because
a
he's
lie.
unaware of anything, even if I was sitting in front of him.
Well, I would be kind of concerned about letting mentally ill people have firearms,
Yeah.
or people that are proven violent felons, or something like that, I think that kind of thing should be at least considered having regulations against.
We have laws against those, yeah,
Yeah.
we do
Yeah,
have
I
laws.
know, but
Yeah, and you know, being extremely cautious, you know, putting some power in the hands of judges in some cases, you know, extremely, you know, light laws that are hard to abuse. The challenge with saying mental illness, I mean, in theory, I agree. The problem is, they don't like your hat, they're gonna say you're mentally ill. If you
And they
question
do.
the election,
That's
you're
right.
mentally ill.
They sure do,
If you're angry about your gun rights, you're mentally ill, you know. So we gotta watch that one. Just like misinformation or terrorist groups is another big one. You know, John Birch
Yeah, we're
Society. This could easily be considered a terrorist group. You know, there's a lot of people very broadly painting that brush.
Yes, we have been told, I have been told by several really progressive people that we are an extremist domestic terrorist group.
Yeah.
And I say, thank you, I appreciate that.
The governor, our existing governor, has referred to the Belknap County Republican Committee as being dominated by extremist right-wingers.
Interesting.
That being said, let me switch a little bit on from the Second Amendment. Since I like your answers, I'll go to a different area, and that is foreign affairs. What's your views regarding the relationship between the United States and the State of Israel?
Well, I think that we have certainly, there are certainly some problems in Israel. Israel's policies, I think, are problematic, and I think that we have contributed to that in some respect, because we have done what we do a lot of times all over the world, which is kind of involve ourselves in other things, other affairs of other countries. And so I think the sort of analogy with Israel would be like somebody goes in a bar and they know that they have like a 10-foot, 10-foot tall biker with heavily armed outside. You know, that person might be more likely to start a fight, you know, if they know that they have somebody outside. So in some ways, I think that our influence has been, sort of problematic. You know, there's a lot of lobbying, and I think this goes across the board. You know, when I see our tax dollars being spent on Israel and things like that, I think that's a problem. As far as Israel specifically, I think there should be a two-state solution. I think. There's a lot of great things to respect about Israel. You know, they have, I think, one of the highest per capita numbers of scientists, and you know, so I think is it the Nobel Prize or something like that. They're very advanced with technology. There's a lot of very good things about Israel, but you know, there are some serious problems as well.
Done?
Done.
Okay. Let's swing back to looking at it from the viewpoint of the Constitution. What is the federal government responsible for with respect to infrastructure? And yes, this is one of my common questions I ask.
With
Yeah.
respect to what?
Infrastructure.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know.
Ask Steve Negro.
From a constitutional standpoint, you know, I've reread it a few times recently since running. I can't really think of a great answer for that. I mean, I know what I believe, which is, you know, minimal to none. You know, I don't really want government doing lots of infrastructure in general. So I'm not really sure what it says in the Constitution, or you know, if there's something that I can think of that's a specific infrastructure section. If there's something I'm missing on it, but
There is
there,
one,
what does it say?
but only one. It is responsible for the postal roads
Okay.
between post offices.
Oh, interesting.
Period.
Okay.
You know, sort of like when Biden said, well, you shouldn't be able to own a cannon. Well, yeah, you could, right from the beginning with
Right.
letters of marque.
Yep.
And that's how our statement started
Mm-hmm.
when the colonialists decided to drive the king's royal governor out of his house. They stole the cannon from the British fort and laid it right in front of his door.
Nice.
You got the picture.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yes. So, given that answer,
Uh-huh.
what would you be doing? Because we spend a ton of money at the federal level. They take our money and then with strings attached, and that'll be another question, and then try to have us spend it in the way that they want us to.
Right.
Should that continue, or would you work to say, why don't you just let the states keep it themselves?
Yeah. Yeah, I would vote no. There's one school of thought that says, you know, it's our federal money and we need more of our share. There's another school of thought, which is my school of thought, which says vote no on these things all the time. I don't want stolen money. I don't want it to be voted at all. I don't want it to go to our state or anybody's state. So I want less and less and less, and let people, not just the states keep their own money, but ultimately let people keep their own money. And if they really want to do something, they'll figure out a way. It will get done. But the closer the money is to the people, the better. I mean, if the state is better than the federal, but ideally your own pocket is better than the state. So yeah, I would not support. I don't want us take, especially these things with strings attached. I wouldn't vote for it's a little different. A lot of times that's voted on the state level, but I wouldn't vote at the federal level to even have to spend it in the first place. And if I had the ability to vote on the state level of accepting it, I'd rather not accept it. I'd rather, just have the government shrink, ideally.
Okay, Steve?
Well, speaking of Islam, which is one of my pet things, do you realize that at its root core, Islam rejects all secular governments, courts, or anything like that? Nothing secular has sway over the ideology of Islam. They have governments that are secular in the Islamic world, but they are secondary to the pressures of the Islamic religion. And you will find, I think, if you study Islam like we have, some of us, that it is misogynistic, homophobic, anti-Semitic. It embraces slavery, sex trafficking, and all sorts of things that, we in the West have kind of swayed away from. How do you feel about that? What's your response to that?
Yeah, I don't agree. There are certainly some Muslims that are misogynistic and all the other things you mentioned, just as there's some Christians. But it's a very broad religion. I don't think makes sense to paint 2 billion people, with it.
Okay.
And I have studied Islam, and I know quite a bit about Islam.
I'm sorry?
I know quite a bit about Islam.
Okay.
I sort of maybe follow up a little bit on Skip's question on the role of the government. The role of the government is, to a large extent, dependent upon how much money it has. And for the first half of the existence of our country, except in time of war, our federal budget averaged approximately 3% of GDP. And I'm not sure what the figure is today, but something like 25%. What, now, we have taken on a different role as a country, and that things are different a little bit, but do you have an idea what would be your target for federal government share of our GDP? Because, I come from the standpoint that says every time Republicans get in a discussion with Democrats over spending, we say, oh, we want to go for this balanced budget. We can balance it at 4.5 trillion. The Democrats, oh, that's not enough. We need 7.5 trillion. So we settle on 6.
Yeah.
It always expands. It never starts to retract into that role of what 10, 13, whatever it is, items in the Constitution that say these are the role of the federal government. I don't see how we get back there, if we should get back there. I think we should,
Millie.
without cutting the spending.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the proper size of the federal government in terms of education?
I'd be curious what it was in 1910 or so, but I think it was around 2% or something like that, wasn't it?
Correct.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, so
Two and a
that's
half
perfect.
percent.
Yeah, 2.5%.
Before World War One.
Something like that.
We had to pass a constitutional amendment to have an income tax.
Yeah, which was 1913.
Yep.
So that's why I said 1910, so yeah, that sounds, I was gonna say 2%, that sounds about right.
How much?
2%,
2%.
yeah,
Okay, I'd go for 2%.
yeah, I mean.
How are we gonna get there?
Yeah, that's see,
That's another question.
there's things that are kind of like dreaming, and then there's things that can actually be implemented. But the interesting thing is, some of the things that are really radical or may seem radical are not possible to pass today. Don't forget, this is a 6-year term. And don't forget that our world is completely in total and utter chaos. And the cash register is about to break. We're bankrupt, and the bubble's going to pop. So I was on an interview one time, and they said, "What would be your perfect bill?" And I said, "I don't know, something that eliminates 20 federal agencies with one bill, one paragraph. This bill hereby eliminates all these." And I kind of laughed, and I said, "Of course, that would never pass while I'm in office." And then I said, "Well, wait a minute. Actually, it could. It could. We are in such unprecedented, it wouldn't pass today, but we are in such unprecedented, crazy times. Would it really shock us if in a year or 2 years from now, our world is as different as it is from 2 years ago? Because if we have another 2 years like the last 2 years, we may have no choice. Even Elizabeth Warren may be saying, well, the money is not there, and it's not there, and it's not there. And we have a year of a Great Depression where people are starving. They may have no choice. And something like Thomas Massey's bill to get rid of the Department of Education may have a chance. So that's why, to go back to the very first question of why I want to run now, it's because of exactly that kind of thing. Because we're in such unprecedented times, we could see us return to 2% because we may have no choice. So even radical things like that are possible. But to your answer, barring that, meanwhile, I think it's just doing what you can. Senate is limited in power. You're only one of 100, but you can take incremental steps. You can do filibusters. You can vote consistently no. You could potentially swing on close votes. You can work with a caucus. There's a few Liberty people there now, and hopefully a few more will get elected. And that's basically what the plan could be.
There are two things that I think are absolutely essential to have any chance for us to fight for fiscal responsibility. One is a firm commitment to always vote no on any continuing resolution, and two, always vote no on any spending bill that doesn't go through the proper process, which I understand ends up with the regular order. 13 separate bills, each one going through a committee, so that every senator and every congressman and everybody in the public has a chance to see what they're talking about spending on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would be in favor of that and take it even a step further. I would also vote for no on everything that expands government or expands spending or expands the tax base. I would be, I liked Ron, I'm not a doctor, but Ron Paul was known as Dr. No. I could be known as, Mr. No or something like that. It's, there's a lot of things. And I also wouldn't vote on anything I haven't read. This idea that you get these bills that are 1,200 pages the day before you vote, I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't vote on it. I'm not going to do it. But there's no way I would vote on that. And there's no way I'd vote on some of these big, I'd be pretty much a no vote on almost all of these.
We need 51 senators, at least, who are willing to stand up and say when they get there. Yeah. I'm voting no on any continuing resolution. I'm voting no on anything.
The only exception I could even think of for anything with spending that I could think of that I would go for is VA, Veterans Benefits, because we do have a commitment to them. They made a deal when they came in, and the deal isn't being honored. They joined and they said, I'm gonna join, and the recruiter said you're gonna get taken care of in the medical, and they're not getting taken care of. So that's kind of like honoring a deal, honoring a contract. So that's the only exception I can think of where I would vote in favor of spending or a spending increase. Otherwise, and there could be rare other examples, but overall, any kind of increase in spending I'm against. And then the other things that you mentioned, continuing resolutions, bills that I haven't read or that you don't have time to read or they haven't gone through committee properly. And those are some of the worst bills, of course. These are the things that are rushed last minute. Patriot Act and things like that. And then they're always trying to shove stuff in these bills. So, that's a big problem.
What's your view on tariffs and foreign trade?
Yeah, I think tariffs are a bad idea. I'm against tariffs overall. It's just, more kind of government meddling. It's the overall big picture idea that people in fancy offices know better than the world or whatever.
And picking winners and losers.
Yeah, picking winners. So the sanctions, same kind of thing. Sanctions are, completely terrible. They're really, really, really harmful to a lot of people. I'm big on, I'd like to see more freedom and more trade.
But that always depends on what the other side, who is your trading partner, talks about.
Right.
Quick little thing on your vote. I'm gonna ask you right now, would that be a promise? And let me tell you why. Back during the Tea Party, there was somebody who wanted to go to Congress. His name was Frank Ginta. He said all the right things, and he promised multiple times that he would never turn his back on the promise, that he would never vote on anything, a bill or a continuing resolution that would increase the national debt, which back then was probably around 3 or 4 trillion. Back at the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. 2010s. Within a year and a half, he had broken his promise.
Yeah.
I railed on him for the next year and a half till his next election, and I am glad to be able to say that Granite Rock helped make him lose. Because he broke a promise. And I will tell you that if you make that promise now, I will watch.
I like it.
And I pounded him every other day. Couldn't do it every day, but I tried a couple of times.
So the exact wording
But-
is vote against any time the national debt is increased?
Yeah, which a continuing resolution, oftentimes,
Yeah.
they're already spending
Yeah, I would
debt.
vote against the one exception, like I said, could be a war, like a major war, but definitely not an undeclared war, definitely not these Afghanistan, Iraq kind of things, not COVID, not these fake emergencies.
Yeah.
It would have to be a very real, and even in those cases, I would first make a priority to do it without increasing, like, hey, we need money for this emergency, let's cut all this crap, and do it, so
Well,
that would be the only exception I could think
Well,
of.
fighting a major war is a constitutional mandate.
Right,
Which is so.
and it should be declared.
All right, I'm going to go back to a philosophical question. I'm
Yes.
trying to get this all out of my system now. The founders had a good philosophical idea of how everything was supposed to be structured.
Mhm.
We have individuals, we have what was supposed to be a limited government, and then civil society in the middle. Which was supposed to be the largest expanse? Who was protecting whom from what? And when did it all start to go south in your idea? So what of those three? What was the role of each? And how come it's now turned into almost just two?
Can you rephrase the question? I'm just trying to figure out the best way to answer that. So
Sure.
If you maybe try like
Sure. They were creating a government.
the founding
Again,
fathers.
individual liberties, freedom. Individual rights and freedoms. So we have individuals.
Mhm.
They're creating a government. And then we have civil society. Proportionally, what was supposed to be the size in relationship to each other?
Well, I think I'm not sure what the size was supposed to be, but I think the individual rights were very clearly supposed to be prioritized. And by civil society, are you talking about the government portion of civil society?
No, totally. The
Oh,
Constitution was meant to be a
so it's individual, civil society, and government are the three?
Are the three.
Three things.
Not so much population, but influence and control.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that, but I mean, I think it should certainly be as little government as possible.
Okay. All right. It's a hard question for somebody who hasn't been reading Granite Rock for a while. But literally, they wanted civil society to be a boundary, a buffer between government and individuals. Because through history, they had seen what that problem would be when government is right up against individuals with no
Which is what we have
society.
now.
Which is why, that kind of why I have that question of how do we restore where most of the interactions were supposed to be within civil society. We would have
Yeah.
our own set of norms, which
Right.
we'll go back to the wokeness, Church of Wokeness
Yes.
at some point, because you're right, we're in a norms changing environment,
Yeah.
which mostly I disagree with. I just lost my train of thought on the
The-
question.
the-
So,
The church.
when did that sectioning off of self-governing, individual self-government, civil society self-government, and then
Yeah.
unlimited government, when did that start to go wrong and sideways in your viewpoint?
I'm not sure when it started to go wrong. I've certainly observed it in my own life. I mean, there's the great chart, WTF happened in 1971. A lot of things started to go haywire once we got on the fiat system, or the modern, kind of debt system. So I suspect that it's probably around then, just looking from, 50s, 60s, 70s, the increasing loss of freedom. I think particularly, with the rise of the administrative state, the way that rules and laws have been done in recent years, I think it continued 70s, 80s. We've just had less and less freedom in recent decades. Certainly from the 90s to today. I mean, you take my career, for example, when I started as an investment advisor 30 years ago, you could open a brokerage account without an ID. You could open it over the phone. You had to pay in a week. I didn't need your ID. I didn't need your date of birth. I didn't need your social. Now, we have a whole generation, the young folks that work for me, they think that's the way it's always been. They think the government's supposed to always know. And in my day, 30 years ago, the older brokers were like, are you out of your mind? What do you mean we have to get an ID from our customers? To them, it was just like selling a television. It'd be like going into Walmart and be like, oh, we need your name, address, social security number. And if we did that for 20 years, if they made the Ministry of Television and you had to do AML KYC to go into Walmart, all it takes is one generation. And in 20 years, the 20-year-olds, guys who work for me, they think that's normal. So, I'm not sure exactly what happened, but I think it's been clear to observe over the last few decades the, increasing, government bumping up right against the individuals. And like you say, with the wokes, less accountability in civil society holding things accountable. I mean, if you don't like what somebody's saying, deal with it yourself in society. If you want to have somebody do an action, then deal with it in society. It's interesting. You talked about Islam. In Saudi Arabia, they had these folks called the Mutawa, the religious police, and they would they'd go and say, you have to wear a headscarf. And that was decreased as, it was decreased by the government because there was a lot of drawbacks. And there's a different group, voluntary group, says, hey, I think you should do this. And that is a huge, and I said this a lot of times when I was in Saudi Arabia. I talked a lot about libertarianism and my looking at the society close and thinking about it in a way that makes sense. And there's a huge difference between voluntary and involuntary. Huge difference. And that's civil society. And that also accounts for different areas. You have different, right here in the United States, we have Dearborn, Michigan. People pray 5 times a day. There's different people, we have different standards and different kind of social norms here in New Hampshire. There's a lot of things that are interestingly not regulated, but they're just kind of known. Very few of the towns have noise ordinances, for example. There's a lot of good ways to sort of self-regulate and have that civil society sort of regulate itself. But that is, definitely decreased in recent decades as we've had government bumping up against the individual more and more and more. So I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but that's the basic thought over the last few decades. Is there a certain time or date you were thinking of?
Well, it actually started back in the 1880s.
1880s.
When Germany, when von Clausewitz was rolling up the Germanic states.
Okay.
And he had to fight socialism. So he convinced, and brilliantly so, that if you give me money, I will give you medical care and a pension.
Mm-hmm.
And that forestalled the socialists. But then American academics, of which Woodrow Wilson was chief of, learned of how socialism was going on and brought it back, but called it progressivism.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at human society from an anti-constitutional standpoint, they thought it was old white guys that was not relevant to the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
We were now scientific. which turned us all into cogs into their social engine. And that's when the growth of government started. Certainly the 17th Amendment, which at some point I'd like to hear what your answer is of repealing that. And then you were right, the Administrative Act of 1948, FDR certainly created huge amounts of government that never went backwards. The Republicans were too scared to
Yeah.
push some of that back. LBJ.
Yeah, I should have mentioned FDR as well, yeah.
LBJ, the Great Society, turned the nuclear family into a hand grenade. And then obviously Obama, and now we're seeing Biden pushing it and pushing it. So that's kind of where I was going with that. I will wait for my next question to ask about one of the recent Supreme Court decisions that has to do with this.
All right.
My next question has to do with the Supreme Court.
Well, good.
Yes. Are we going to get into a arms race between liberals and Democrats about how we stack the Supreme Court? And that's what it's looking like now. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, they put in a proposal, what, 6 months ago, and then a year ago also, I think. So there is people who want to stack the court, and or pack the court, stack the court either way. And I'm definitely obviously super against that. Especially now, especially because it's driven by purely political motivations. This is a horrible, horrible idea.
The thing is about that is it could go, an extreme right group could be doing the same thing. So, you keep piling them up there. It gets to be the size of the New Hampshire legislature. So how do we prevent that?
Well, it depends what they try and do. If there's a procedural way, or if it comes to a vote, certainly I'd vote against it. If they try and, I could try and filibuster or whatever if they try and put the appointees. I guess it depends what mechanism they try and do. Certainly if it's legislation, if it's something I would have the power to do as a senator, then I would do everything I could against it.
Would you support a constitutional amendment to limit the size to a certain thing?
Yeah, I haven't thought about that too much. As far as that solution, I'd be very, very cautious about constitutional amendments, but in principle, I think that sounds good. I mean, it definitely shouldn't be expanded, particularly not for any kind of
On a
political
closely related topic, we have conservative judges that pretty much follow the Constitution as written, or as close to as they can, their ideology permits. Where, on the other hand, we have activist judges that are going off on all kinds of tangents. How do we deal with that and correct that?
Well, one of the powers that the Senate has that is a unique power in government is that they do confirmations for federal judges and military as well. And a lot of times that power isn't flexed much. It's been sort of a rubber stamp for many, many times. And it shouldn't be. It's something that should be taken seriously because we do have, in both cases, and we have General Miley, we have some bad generals at the highest levels of our government.
Oh, yes.
A general going on, saying the things that he says absolutely unacceptable. He's not serving our country. He's bad-mouthing his own country, his own president in some cases. When Trump was president, and he's furthering this idea. When he went on there, it really bothered me that he said, I need to understand white rage, because of 1/6. That's a highly charged and ridiculous political statement that even if it was true, which it is not, he has no business making that statement as in his position. So military and judges as well, and there's a lot of bad judges, I think, and you can look at their record. Almost all of the positions that are coming up for confirmation have a good record that you can look at. And I think that should be flexed. They should follow the Constitution. They should follow the Constitution.
Yeah.
So if there's somebody who's coming up who hasn't followed the Constitution.
Yeah, most of these guys have been put in for life.
Yeah.
So.
And I believe you can even filibuster those confirmations.
Is it a solution that's going to take decades to redo, to fix, or is it going to be some process or some means to change it.
Yeah, we have, Trump appointed a lot of judges that were pretty good. And so that's probably one of his biggest legacies as far as like meaningful actions taken during his office. Yeah, I'm not sure how to solve it. And I'm really even more concerned about younger people. Because we have judges now that are like, I don't know what the youngest judges are, but there's probably judges that are like 30, millennials. And these millennials and even Gen Z, even worse, the school systems and academia and Hollywood and the media have utterly failed 2 generations now, the millennials and Gen Z. And so the thought of having some of these judges or some of these people in this generation, and I don't want to make it too much about generation, there's people with bad ideas of all ages, but I think it's particularly bad because of the education system. The difference between a baby boomer or my age or a little bit younger is a big difference. My age and older, we all were taught things like, even if we disagree with somebody's speech, it's okay. I remember 5th grade, and my teacher explained why Nazis should be protected, and he showed the illustrations from the ACLU about why they did this, and he explained that they were Jewish lawyers defending this. And I don't think they teach that anymore, because there's a lot of people working at the Huffington Post, and it's this generation and this kind of thinking. Some of them could be appointed as federal judges, and they believe words are violence, and they don't believe that certain speech should be allowed, and they do not understand. They think that the Second Amendment is flawed, and that the First Amendment is flawed. They want to repeal Citizens United, which means what? Change the First Amendment. And they haven't thought about these things. They don't have depth. They're certainly not a liberty depth. They're very skin deep. So I think judges, working on the confirmations for judges is an important role that's been underdone by senators.
Don?
Well, I'll make a couple comments. One of my pet peeves is that some people still talk about those people as being liberals. There's nothing liberal about them.
Right.
They're either leftists or Marxists,
Right.
or find another. They're not They're not a damn.
A true liberal is a classic liberal. I'm a
That's
classic
right.
liberal. I should probably say
we
that.
all are
more.
classical liberals. We believe in freedom and our rights.
I should throw everybody off and start using that branding more. Just say liberal.
I've been saying that
And let
for
them ask
years.
why.
And I keep doing it.
I wanted to comment on what something you said too, but I can't remember what the other guys. The trouble with getting old. Following up on role and size of government, maybe not so much a question, but it's tremendously difficult, it seems to me, to cut the size of government. And one way, I'm thinking of multiple ways that might start to help, and also to some extent start reducing the power of Washington D.C. itself. One, I think we ought to have an objective, not only of cutting the government, but of moving at least half of its employees out of D.C. At least 200 or 300 miles away from D.C. I mean, why is agriculture centered in D.C.? It should be in Iowa or California or
Right.
someplace, and get them out of there, make them live where people are real. And
Yeah.
have to live in the world, the real world, and they maybe can absorb a little bit of knowledge about what that means. So I think that's a useful thing, moving them out. A couple of other real pet peeves is our politicians screw up, so they, quote, shut down the government, and then, because the politicians screwed up, the taxpayers end up funding these people that have been on vacation for a couple of weeks. Well, it put a little bit more pressure on the politicians if you say, hey, we don't pay these people. If you politicians screw up, you want to pay them, you pay it out of the politician's pocket, but not out of the taxpayer pocket. So that's one, but that sort of gets to the whole thing. A lot of, I believe, of what's going on is money laundering, taxpayer money through other entities back into the Democrat Party. And part of that is government unions, and part of it is funding for all those environmental groups, immigration groups like La Raza and all those things. And every one of them, Planned Parenthood, we give them money, they turn around and give it to the Democrat Party. We gotta stop that.
Right.
My impression from what you said before is that we could count on you to vote no on that. Now, the problem is, you know, you're gonna get a bill and, oh, it has all this wonderful stuff in it, and it's still got all this crap in it.
Yeah.
And so what you gonna do?
Well, I don't think most of them do have wonderful stuff, so there's very few things that I would kind of like fall in love with, and if there's something bad in the bill, I just want to vote for the bill, you know, in almost every case, you know, it would have to be something so extraordinary, you know, to do a trade-off, like if there's something that eliminates 10 departments and then does something with one, you know, so it has to be net deregulatory and net shrinking, you know, is what it ultimately has to be. So there's not things that I think are good in most of these bills, especially not enough to make me. I mean, there's things like minor number of things I think are kind of cool. Like I have a soft spot for NASA. I like NASA. It's kind of neat. I like rockets, but so what? I like comic books too. It doesn't mean I can steal money from you. So we have the National Comic Book Collection. That's ridiculous. You know, let Elon do his thing with private dollars. He gets a lot of public dollars too, but he should do it with private dollars. If it's cool,
NASA's great, but our billionaires are doing better with much less money.
Yeah.
Their money.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as far as, you know, how can we fix it? You mentioned when you first started the question, you know, it's hard to fix it? And it has been, because we've been operating under the rules of the way that things have
Well,
worked.
probably because the Republican Center is run by Mitch McConnell,
Right,
and he believes there's no value in cutting spending
yeah.
or any item.
Yeah, these things work until they don't. So I wouldn't be so quick to say that it can't be changed quickly. It could change very quickly. It could, and I could be one of the people who does it, because it works until it doesn't. The system is really broken. The debt is completely unsustainable. We are in the most fragile spot of almost any country in history. The whole world is shaky and fragile and broken. It's built on a completely fraudulent financial system. And it's totally unsustainable. You can't print $500 billion out of thin air and give it to BlackRock. Are you out of your mind? That's not a thing. There's nothing in any economics. There's no Adam Smith book that says like, oh, page 300, if the flu's really bad, print 9 trillion and give 500 billion to your banker cronies and 8 trillion to your other cronies, and then it'll fix it.
Yeah.
That's not a thing. And there must be a price that is paid for this. It's going to come back, and it's going to come home to roost, and it will be economic wreckage, I think. So you could have radical. Unfortunately, it'd probably the catalyst would be tragedy and maybe even bloodshed and death. But you could see in my term radical cutting of government. And maybe I'll be the one to do that. I mean, I think it could get so bad that I could look at Elizabeth Warren herself and say, look, we don't agree on anything, we never have, but look at our country. If her own family is worried about food, she may come along, and even somebody like that may say, yeah, you know, at the end of the day, our country is our country. If you just don't have the money and the system is broken, it's unfixable. The dollar is just about unfixable now. So eventually, you can't keep up the sham forever. Eventually, the house of cards is going to collapse, and even the Elizabeth Warrens and the AOCs and the Paul Krugmans of the world will Robert Reich, you know, they'll see it. It will be, there won't be anything they can do about it.
Their argument was always going to be, we got to give people stuff to help them out.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me the argument these days is our side, which says, give them the opportunity and the economy in which they can prosper, and theirs is, give them money. They'll be good, so they'll be grateful to us.
Right.
And we got to stop the one. And I'm probably taking too much of my time.
Mr. Norm.
Well, I've got a couple of things. There are federal proposals floating around Washington these days to federalize the election system
Yeah.
the ballot integrity system, or the ballot, lack of backup ballot integrity system, the way we vote around the country. That's one proposal that's floating around. The other proposal is a federal version of red flag laws,
Yeah.
which are floating around. And then, you mentioned one of the Department of Education seems to be sort of an easy target, and every politician focuses, on the right seems to focus on the Department of Education. I've got a whole laundry list, but one of my favorites is the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
No!
The Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
You're just
Why?
so nasty.
Why in the world do we allocate tax dollars to support the Corporation for Public Broadcasting?
Yeah, there's no good reason for it. It's absurd. And I remember a few years ago when they were trying to, scare us with this, Congress is gonna kill Sesame Street kind of thing. It's just absurd. And it's even sad, there's this old tearjerker clip of Fred Rogers going in there asking for the funding, and he gives a poem, and the Congress member's like, I'm a tough guy, but you brought it here, I'm gonna give you your funding. And to me that, it's an interesting thing, and I understand why people like it, but to me, and I love Fred Rogers, but to me it represents sort of everything wrong with government. And I wish that somebody would have talked to Fred Rogers and said, there's so many well-meaning people. I just met one on the street the other day who was asking me about their wonderful issue, a very good issue that is very meaningful and does a lot of good, and they were saying, like, will you support this in government? My polite answer was, no. You don't, just because something's good, like Sesame Street, doesn't mean you need government. In fact, the fact that it's good is all the less reason you need government. The idea that without government we wouldn't have Sesame Street is utterly, completely, and totally absurd. And I can prove it because I will buy Sesame Street. Do you think I wouldn't buy Sesame Street? Like, we're out of business.
Mark,
Well,
I'll buy it, and you know what? I couldn't afford it because Disney or somebody it's worth billions of dollars.
Well, Jim Henson, which is was behind the Sesame Street originally, had a profit-making venture called Fraggle Rock,
Right.
which was sold to HBO, and which made a lot of money, and you can still
And
buy
they
it.
make money on the merchandising and the licensing. So
Absolutely.
you got PBS doing
Yep.
this thing, and the show is produced, and then it's Carrie's buddies on Beacon Hill who get the totally separate. Oh no, this is a totally separate company over here that does the licensing and merchandising.
Right.
And it's interesting. I've been in the studio for one of the big PBS studio in Boston. I've been to a lot of these studios, and it's quite interesting. I'm telling. You go in every other studio, everywhere you go, even a big group. I haven't been on Rogan, but I know people who have. Even something like that, it's usually pretty small. You go in PBS, there's 30, 40 people. It's just big, everything. Big, thick sound rooms that look like they're from NASA. Thick walls, every extra doors. It's just. That's what happens when you have government money and these kind of grants and things like
There's
that.
no discipline.
It's a lot of waste.
So, point you back to federalizing the elections and federalizing red flag laws.
Yeah, I think that elections should be as local as possible with as much accountability as possible. There's too much potential for centralized shenanigans if it's federalized at the if it's put at the federal level. Red flag laws, absolutely, I'm totally against that. I'm against any new restrictions. They're too easy to abuse. You gotta always look at everything and say, how could this be abused? And a lot of people don't do that, and I encourage people on the left to do that as well. Because I a lot of times I say, well, would you want Trump to have this power? If they want some new power. Surprisingly, people don't think in terms of systems like this. And there was something else you asked about the red flag.
Red flag, the federalizing the elections, and then
Right.
Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Yeah,
right.
so,
Yeah.
Against all of them.
How are we doing on time?
It is 7:50.
Okay.
So we got we're going to 8:30.
8:30?
Yeah.
Is that
So
okay
we got
with you?
30,
That's good.
40 minutes.
Okay. All right. This kind of meshes in with cutting government as well, and also back to the Supreme Court, because as you are probably well aware of, 5 important decisions over the last 2 weeks were handed down by the Supreme Court for different reasons. As much as I love seeing the 2 religious liberty cases decided, that of Maine, which will open up school choice, because you can't discriminate against religious schools. And also the football coach, where all he did was just go to the 50-yard line after a game, and he eventually got fired for praying silently because students and other coaches and other people out of the stands would go and pray with him. They said that's violating the separation of church and state. Important. New York City's gun ban was blown away for, again, violating liberty. But I think the most consequential one from a governmental standpoint was the EPA one. And I've been having a ton of fun discussing in comment sections on socialist sites and Tree Hugger that I started, that I mentioned earlier, and I gotta bring that back to Granite Rock, which basically said that just like we here in New Hampshire are a Dillon's Rule state, no subdivision of the state can do anything without authorizing legislation passed by the state legislature. EPA got slapped down hard because the Supremes, those that actually looked at the law, looked at the Constitution, decided EPA was not an environmental case, it was a separation of powers state, where the EPA went rogue because it had no authorizing legislation allowing it to do CO2. That's a specific decision against one agency. Do you think, and I'm known for ramming up I'm putting you in the box canyon, big run up and then finally the question. Steve McDonald, the editor for Granite Rock, hates it when I do this. Do you think that there will be a flurry of other lawsuits by those of us who wish to see smaller government against other agencies that have gone rogue? For years I've said every bureaucracy is going to take on more than what their original mission statement said to justify themselves. Is that a valid way to put government back into that 2% range we were talking about before?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of lawsuits, and some of our best rights have been sort of clarified by successful lawsuits. There's been some good Miranda rights. I think there's been a lot of things that have been done by legislation, but the lawsuits is underlooked. I mean, it's equally or more important in many cases. There's been some very, very important legal decisions, and so I support that because there's a lot of ways you can get because the administrative state and petty bureaucrats and elected officials at all levels will just run right over the law and run right over your rights, and it's quite difficult to get it in front of a judge. In some cases, it's very clear. There's rights all the time. There's violations all the time in New Hampshire and other places of 93A access to public meetings or whatever. Where it's not followed, but it's the law. And all you got to do is get that in front of a judge, and in many cases the cases are pretty strong. The law is clear, and the judge can formalize that opinion, and then everybody has that to go, especially the higher up it goes. You have like Carly Gierke who sued about the right to film police here in New Hampshire, and that went up to the Supreme Court, New Hampshire Supreme Court. So that's the law that they have to follow. And if I want to film a police and they say no, I can pull up her decision. So those are important. I'd actually like to see more of that, particularly the last couple of years. I actually was trying to find lawyers. It's quite hard to find good lawyers who will take these cases. Here in New Hampshire, there's very, very, very few. And the key word is good. And then also it's expensive. If you do have somebody who's really good, they're often with a big firm and expensive. So finding the right person, a lot of lawyers are afraid to upset judges. They don't want to be seen as frivolous. So it takes the right combination of everything. To answer, yes, I think there will be a flurry, because there is. The good news is, despite how hard it is, particularly when you want to go to these cases, you want to go up to the state Supreme Court or something, that's usually involved and often expensive. But I think there will be. There's a lot. There's case at any given time. There's a lot of cases in process, various levels, and these things. So hopefully, there's already good teams, You know, you can name any agency, there's gotta be 10 good lawsuits, our kind of people pushing them, and, you know, so hopefully some of these teams are emboldened by what's going on, and they're gonna amp it up. And then hopefully some of these decisions just stand by themselves. You know, there's other people who will be referencing, because when it's the Supreme Court, they can reference that every other, you know, already I think they're referencing some of these decisions are, you know, because the lawyers will put it in their arguments like now, like today. They'll say, hey, the Supreme Court said this, and they'll be using that. So some of the lower courts could use these recent decisions by the Supreme Court to, you know, rule on the lower court level very effectively.
Do you think it'll spill down to the state level and the local levels as well?
I hope so. I hope that the judges are just as upset as everybody else. And I think one good news about judges is that they should certainly understand the Constitution. They're different generation. They're you know, I think a lot of them unfortunately are brainwashed by woke, nonsensical, fake news media. But
And law schools.
in law schools, yeah, especially the younger ones, you know. But I think at the core, you know, they haven't been flexing enough, and I suspect that there would have been a lot more cases for liberty that were won. I think there was a couple ones that I could have won around masks and different things like that. I couldn't find lawyers to take them. It's very difficult to find somebody. But I think that you know, hopefully the judges are getting upset about this just like everybody else. They must see. And, you know, I like to think of judges as being very constitutional. I know they're supposed to be, they not always are, but I like to feel that, like, you know, and I mean, I'd like to, if I had time, I would even take some of these cases myself. I actually talked to quite a good lawyer who was gonna advise me. They won't maybe take the case themselves because they don't wanna put their name on the reputation, but they'll advise you. So they'll tell you what to say. Somebody who's got a good talker like me, if I have a great lawyer coaching me, say this, don't do this, do this, do that, follow this procedure, I'm gonna help you write this, proofread it, that could actually be effective. And I think people can do that. But I'd love to go to some of these judges myself. The reason I say that is I'd like to, because I think I could argue it. I mean, it's just, some of this stuff is just wrong. And I think it's just fundamentally unworkable. You know, for example, schools being able to say, your kid needs to wear a political signal. I just don't believe that's a right that they have. I don't believe they have the right to tell you to wear a political signal any more than they have to wear a mask. And I would argue with a judge, I'd go to in front of a judge in New Hampshire and I'd say, Your Honor, the reason that I'm calling it a political signal is because in my case, there's 3 or 4 school board members that we caught who were enforcing masks on the kids and not wearing them themselves. So it wasn't about health. If it was about health, then they wouldn't have been wearing them at the football games and going all around making the kids wear them. If they were truly worried, and that's another matter, even if they're truly worried, I say tough. That's a different legal argument. But my specific legal argument, I think, is a stronger argument, was that it is a political signal. It's a political signal now. The mask is used as a signal to say, look at me, I'm in the church of woke, look at me, I'm better than you, I'm doing the right thing. It's a signal. It's very much a signal. That's why the people are hypocrites about it. You see hundreds of videos online of these people where, you know, they're going out without a mask and they see the camera and they put the mask on. They'll go without a camera and they'll walk right up to the stage and they'll put the mask on so they can walk from the stage to the podium and then they take it off. It's a show. And that's a signal. It's a political signal. And I got no problem with political signals if they are voluntary. But government, state government, federal government, local government, this is where one thing where the state could come in and say, no, you do not have the right. You don't have a right to tell my kid to wear a mask any more than you have a right to tell him to wear a MAGA hat or a BLM shirt or a Democrat shirt or a Republican shirt. It's not your right. It's not your right. It's not your right to tell my kids to wear a political signal. You want to go wear your own political signal? Go do it at the Church of Woke. And that I think is something a judge should, if they agree that it's a political signal, then that should be a cut and dry case. And I think I could make the case that it's a political signal. So anyway, I got off on top, you know, it's the same topic, but, you know, I think that a different kind of activism by the citizens is what we need, advocates and activists for the Constitution. And more people pushing these, and maybe we find those good judges. I mean, there might be judges sitting there, there's got to be judges who understand this stuff. And I suspect there's judges sitting right there, and they just haven't had a case. They may hate this stuff, they may say this is absolutely out of their mind. They're victims of it too. Somebody making their grandkids wear a mask, maybe, or you know, just using that as an example, could be any other thing. They might be sitting there just ready to smash the hammer down on the tyrants, and nobody's brought a case. Because it takes all the branches of government. You know, we have legislative, executive, and judicial. You need the judicial. Nobody brings the case. The tyrants in the administrative state can just walk all over it. They can take your thing and rip it up. It's just like in the movies, you know. They don't need to pay attention to your rights if they have the power of the bully pulpit.
Back to you, Steve.
Okay. In this conversation, we have come around that I've got more questions coming now than I had when I come in, which is normal.
Yes,
Which
I
is
know.
normal, and it
I
should
know.
be. So one of the ones that has come up to me and brought up by these grants that the government passes out willy-nilly to everybody, like government broadcasting,
Right.
whatever they call it, public broadcasting and all this crap. There should be a limit, or at least some guideline as to what is an appropriate field for a government to give a grant to. What are they? What should it be?
Nothing.
Well,
I like that.
I think there's certainly some government grants that are worthwhile. I can't name them.
Yeah, I can't name any. I can't imagine there would be any.
They're all worthwhile. They're all worthwhile.
Yeah, they're worthwhile to this
But
fat cat
if they're
contract.
worthwhile enough, the people who are affected will fund them.
Right.
One of my pet peeves is Laconia got $15,000 to buy AR-15s. I don't know, 10 years ago or something, 8 years ago. And I figure it probably cost the taxpayers $50,000 to give them that money. Because it had to cost Laconia $2,000 or $3,000 at least to request the grant, and maybe more. It had to cost the government, the federal government, thousands of dollars to process it.
Yeah.
And they did it for hundreds of places that whose grants they didn't come through on.
Right.
And in the end, it's costing us a mint. And if they wanted AR-15s, they could have, out of their $1 million budget, they could have come up with $15,000, or maybe they only needed $6. I mean, it's just friggin' crazy. You gotta stop all federal money to the states has to stop. I think it just, all right, shut up.
So, are you going to go down there to Washington and vote against every one of these grants
Yeah.
that these people come up with?
Yeah. 100%.
I think he's saying if you believe the right target is 2%, you're gonna have to vote against everything.
Yeah,
That's what it's about.
I'd vote. You know, it's across the board. I'd just vote against all of this stuff. It's our money. It's the citizens' money. The
Yeah.
government doesn't have any right to take our money for anything. Really,
Let's
not
not even
moral
go
right
for
that they
3%.
have.
That's what the average was in the first 100 after our country, about
Can
3%.
I ask
I go with that.
one more question, Fabian, before I pass the buck here? I am very big against Antifa and Black Lives Matter, okay? I consider them domestic terrorists. What's your opinion of them? What do you think, how do you think we should respond to them or deal with them or something like that?
Yeah, it's definitely violent ideology. Bad groups around both of these things. Black Lives Matter originally was just sort of a slogan, but it was very quickly co-opted by sort of a group with very bad ideology who's wasted a lot of money, stolen a lot of money. But most importantly, with both groups, and especially the overlap of some BLM, there's some misguided people who just put on a phrase on their Twitter because
Follow the crowd.
the woke police told them to, or they were afraid of getting canceled or whatever else. But there is some people within BLM, and especially a lot of Antifa people that are really, really violent and terrible. You look at Andy Ngo and other people who follow these kind of things. It just has no place in America. And the solution is that they're violating all kinds of laws, and that's got to be stopped. You can't just say like, oh, too bad, there's too many of them. We can't stop it. You just have to have law and order. You can't have people who've worked on their business for 30 years get the windows smashed, and people, you know, I saw these people on a TikTok video last night, they're just driving and they see this big crowd of protesters, you know, like all people in black, and the you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, they say, oh boy, are they friendly? And I don't know, and one of them sure enough jumps up on the window, smashes their window, no reason, they're just thugs. And it's a very bad ideology with bad ideas, and ideas that violence is okay, hurting somebody who you disagree with is okay. You know, basic caveman level, you know, they're like kindergartners with adult bodies and the mind of kindergartners, and dangerous and bats, and they'll hit you right over the head with them if they, you know, get their feelings hurt.
And the people that support them, like the college professors and that sort of thing, how do you deal with them?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to go back to the basics. You know, I mentioned like the difference between baby boomers and Gen X versus now. We were taught these things in school. You don't hit people unless they hit you first. Period. Like, duh. That's third grade level stuff. And they're not being taught. They're being confused by all this cloudiness. They put in all these new words, and they're trying to change the definition of what words mean, and this new woke ideology that tries to take basic fundamental things, like don't hit somebody if they, you know, unless they hit you first. You know, words are not violent. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can't hurt me. These are things you're supposed to learn 5, 6, 4 years old, even little young people, and you're supposed to continue to learn that in first grade, second grade, third grade. You're supposed to have a foundation in these things by 5th grade. Very young, little kids are supposed to know these basic things. And now we have 20 and 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds even who don't know this basic stuff, and they think that it's okay to hurt somebody. You know, you remember the punch a Nazi? Oh, punch a Nazi! Oh, it's so funny. We're gonna punch Nazis. And that was a big meme a couple of years ago. It was all everywhere. And anybody who said, "Well, hold on, who's a Nazi? And is it okay to punch somebody just because they're a Nazi?" The answer is Nazi is anybody who you think is a Nazi. And number 2, even if they were an actual Nazi, like I say in the 70s, that's supposed to be defended in the United States. And that's something that's totally lost. If you go to a college campus and say, should Nazis have a right to speak? They're going to say no, and a good chunk of them, Antifa types, think that the Nazi, and I'm talking about actual Nazis. So this is a whole different discussion from what they're doing. But I'm talking about an actual Nazi with an actual armband. Should be allowed to speak in America and is under our Constitution. And there's people who do not know that and do not understand that. And then they got the very bad idea that it's okay to hurt somebody because you disagree with them. And they start with Nazis. And now what has happened? Very, very, very predictably, the definition of Nazi has expanded to Republicans, libertarians, free staters, pro-gun people. 60% of the country is probably considered to be a Nazi by 20%. I mean, which is absurd. And then you stretch it like, oh, okay, it's okay to hit that guy in the head because he has a MAGA hat on. And these are fundamentally barbaric things that have no place in our society. It's just not workable. Can't have that. Can't have it at all. It's just totally wrong. So yeah, we've got to put a stop to it.
I want to comment on 2 things. Then get to immigration, because I want to talk about that. But in terms of rioters, it seems to me, hey, if you got, first of all, primarily it's a local problem. Local officials ought to take care of it. The trouble is that they don't take care of it. They let it happen.
Yeah.
Then they come to the federal government and say, oh, we need money to repair the city. Okay, so federal government ought to be saying, hey, you have the ability to shut that down, and if you don't, you and your local taxpayers get to pay for it. We're not paying for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I think if you start doing that enough, maybe we'll have an influence. But the way things work today is if you're a Democrat supporting rioter, you get off scot-free.
Right.
And if you're not, well, then look out.
Yeah, we have a 2-tiered system of justice too, which is a big problem with
problem.
leftist prosecutors and judges who just let people go out a revolving door for committing lefty crimes, and then they make a mountain out of a molehill with.
I want to float an idea or just throw it out. You don't need to comment on this, but in terms of I think we're not really in danger of getting a bill that packs the Supreme Court. Because I think we got one or two Democrats that are standing in the way at the moment. But maybe we need to start floating the idea that if they pass a bill to pack the Supreme Court, when Republicans take over, which we damn well better this fall, we're gonna block every nominee until there's a Republican president. Then if they add 4, we're gonna get 4 Gorsuches added to the Supreme Court.
I prefer Alito's and Thomas's,
Yeah.
but that's beside the point.
Okay, but I would
That's the kind of thing that's an arms race when it gets to that kind of thing though. But I like the idea of making the cities pay for their own crap.
Yeah, okay, I believe the typical libertarian position is open immigration. Looking at your website, you said you believe in essentially open immigration as long as it's legal, as long as they follow the process. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, and I think the process should be really, 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 really easy.
Easy. Well,
Like, hey, here I am, come on in.
yeah, well, I think there are different levels of our working levels of workers who are more or less able to compete. And if you, for example, you look at the unemployment statistics, at least the last time I checked them, there's unemployment rate significantly greater for those without a high school degree. And then as you work your way up in terms of education level, the unemployment rates, fall significantly. So I think we have enough unskilled, uneducated people in our country until every one of those Americans has a job and is self-sustaining. I don't think we have enough PhDs and entrepreneurs and that kind of thing, people who are really going to contribute to the growth of our economy. And so I would argue a little bit with that. But so getting back to, that's the legal part, and we'd have a discussion. So what about two things? The border, and what do we do with the millions of illegal aliens who are here today?
Yeah. So, I think that I have a position that is the best position for both sides, because you have on one side, and I've talked to a lot of Republicans, that's been my job, to win the primary, I gotta go talk to Republicans. I've been, mostly talking to Republican town committee meetings and so on. And most of them tell me what they want is a solid border, and they want the law enforced. And that's the main thing they want. And I think that can be accomplished. Now, I do talk to people on the other side, I talk to people on the left. Most of them are kind of all over the place, but the general gist is there's a lot of poor people and a lot of people suffering and families separated and people who've been here forever that would be very disruptive to society and their families to send them out. There's people who've been here illegally, their kids are legal, their kids go here, all these issues. So with the generally, we'll call it left and right, generally a lot of well-meaning people on this side, but the solutions are wrong. The solution so far for many is, well, let's just let everybody break the rules. And then you have two differences. It doesn't work either way. So you have a lot of problems coming with the illegal immigration, and then the people, on the right are not happy at all because there's no border and it's Swiss cheese people coming through. There's issues. I think the ultimate solution, and I think that both sides could be quite happy if I go to the Republican side or generally Republicans and say, hey, if we did have a strong border and we did follow the law, would you be happy? Most of them will say yes. And if I go to the other side and say, if these people could have a path to get here or could be here legally, are you happy with that? And the answer is yes. Now, can you just snap your fingers and solve it? It's not super easy, but at least if we went to that path, I think we could. So to get to the 30 million people who are here illegally, I think everybody should be here legally. And the problem is, it's just like drug laws and other things, it's just widely ignored because the law is so difficult. We're not supposed to be a place that takes 7 years to come here. We had the Statue of Liberty, give us your poor, you're sick, you're tired, you're hungry. You know, we're supposed to be a nation of
Those are
immigrants.
before welfare laws.
Right, well, this, I was getting to that. Because the way to do the solution is, you have to get rid of entitlements. Because Americans will never, support more open immigration, freer immigration, easier immigration that I want if entitlements are part of it. And I wouldn't support it either. I want people to come here and do their own thing, and I want them to pursue a better life and come to America and work. And I want everybody to be able to do it, not just PhDs. There is unemployment among the less educated, but there's also massive employment shortage among the employers. So it's that a lot of people, a lot of the Americans.
Is that real or is that artificial because they're
Yes.
getting paid too much by the government?
Well, right. It's partly artificial because they're getting paid by the government. They don't want to work. But there is immigrants who want to work. Because I talk to all the
Yeah.
business owners around here. They don't have anybody who wants to work. You probably go into restaurants and
Yeah.
stuff around here.
Yeah.
They're short. They're all short-staffed. Immigrants could fill that need, be healthier for the economy. Overall, immigration is good if you get rid of the entitlements. Because I would never support it with entitlements. You can't say, hey, come on over. Oh, by the way, here's $1,800 a month or $1,000 a month or something. That doesn't make any
Everybody
sense.
that's coming in today illegally is getting $200
Yeah.
for transportation and
They shouldn't get
medical
anything.
care.
They shouldn't get anything
education
at all.
for the kids and yeah,
Yeah, shouldn't get
it's
anything.
crazy.
Right. But yeah, if we get
They're
rid of
actually being bribed to come here.
yeah.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah. So yeah, I think if we got rid of entitlements, we could make a path easier so that the person who wants to come in legally doesn't have to sit here waiting 7 years while 1 million people come in illegally. You know, there's people in Mexico who've been sitting there for 6 years waiting to come in
Oh, I
legally,
know, yeah.
and meanwhile 10 million people have
I've
come in
talked to
illegally.
people whose wives have waited for years and years.
Yeah.
So
to
that
come
would be
legally. It
a
costs them
case of
thousands
you
of
have to
dollars.
reform the immigration
Once,
system,
once,
right?
once,
The
once,
immigration
on the wall.
requirements.
On the wall.
Oh yeah, and make it a lot
Responses.
easier. I mean, way,
Coming
way,
too
way
bright.
easier. It should
Too
be.
bright for the cameras.
It should be easy to come here, especially if you're not a felon, you know, I mean, we lose a lot of business. I travel a lot. I do a lot of business globally, and we lose a lot of business by being so closed. Ever since 9/11, we've been on the,
Since being so what?
since being so closed up, since 9/11, we've lost more and more business. You know, there's a lot of people that would like to come here. The United States has a worse and worse reputation globally. It's known by a lot of international business people who would come here and invest as a place that you can't get in. It's a pain in the neck. They're going to treat you horribly when you get here, and you can't do any business because there's 10,000 rules about securities and every other law.
That's what drove all of
Yeah.
our businesses overseas.
Yeah.
I'm gonna break that off for a little bit because it's Norm's turn.
Well, what just comes to mind, we were talking about federal programs and federal grants. I had the experience being one of the state representatives, that's one of the 18 representatives in Belknap County. We deal with the county budget, and Belknap County received from the federal government so-called ARPA funds of several millions of dollars, and we had to vote to allocate who in the county on a wish list that was given to us, a 2-page wish list of different expenditures that they wanted to spend the money on, and we had to vote what was appropriate to give this federal money. And when questions were raised by a few people in the delegation about why are we even doing this, the answer was given: if we don't take the money, some other state or some other county is going to get it. If we don't take the money, how do we combat that mindset? Is there a way to combat that mindset?
Well,
And to give you an example, in the Gunstock ski area, we voted to give them $1.5 million in ARPA funds to air condition a building and to pave a parking lot, while they were sitting on cash reserves in excess of $10 million.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, the way to stop that, I mean, you can try and reject it at a local level. Like you say, it goes back to other states. So it's more of a systemic issue. And in this case, the root of it is the federal government itself, printing this money from thin air. And that's just, that problem's really gonna fix itself. There's not a ton one senator can do on that, just other than being there at the right moment, because it won't be sustainable. It's not going to work. Eventually it's gonna break, probably soon. You just can't keep doing it. So, you know, if I had the power, I mean, if I had 25 votes in the Senate or something, then I could try and do something about it directly. I mean, I could try, it would be one vote. I could try to caucus with others and so on. But eventually it's gonna solve itself, and those votes, those bills are probably gonna pass, and that's why I wanna be there. I wanna be there at the beginning to try and get ahead of this stuff. We just can't keep up business as usual. I think it's more likely the situation in the world is gonna stop that than anything I can do.
All set?
Set.
Okay, we're almost 8:30, so this is gonna be the last question.
Okay?
There was an interesting post on Instapundit, which is owned by Glenn Reynolds. You're familiar, okay? Where Glenn had put up an article taken up by the New York Post about how to make the Supreme Court more resilient, so that if, you know, with the attempted assassination of Kavanaugh, it would have gotten rid of a lot of these latest decisions, because it just would have ground to a halt.
Right.
So he had the idea that perhaps the president puts in 5 judges, the Senate puts in 5 judges, and then each of the state legislators would put in 2 judges themselves. So make it a huge Supreme Court, so not so much packing it. And then somebody wrote, and I was having my own thoughts as I was reading this description, and yes, it would make it more resilient and all of that. And somebody just said, well, Glenn, why don't you just get rid of the 17th Amendment and make senators part of, you know, once again, appointed by their state legislators. And so there's a lot of laughing going on about that. So the question would be, would you, if given the opportunity within the first 6 months of being a senator, vote yourself out of office, because it's probably not likely that our state legislature would vote to keep you there.
Yeah, I like the idea of maybe they would though, it might change. I think they're gonna like me. I think everybody in New Hampshire's gonna like me if I get down there. I'm exactly what we need. I'm exactly the message that we need to send down there. But yeah, I would vote to. It's an issue I'd like to study more, but generally my feeling and understanding on repealing of the 17th is that it would, you know, put more power in the hands of the states, and I'm in favor of reducing federal power, and I'm in favor of reducing my own power. One of the things I looked into in going down there is just like, what things can I do even personally? I mean, your own budget, for example. You know, you get a budget, I think it's around $3.5 million for this seat, and I'd like to see what the record is. I'm a disruptor, so you could expect me to do things quite differently. You know, breaking records, and you know, I'm the type of person to say, well, what's the lowest anybody's ever done? Let me see if I can I run it for 250. You know, can I return $3 million a year to the taxpayers? It's more of a gesture, honestly. But I like the idea of mixing it up and you know, kind of breaking things a little bit. So something like that is the kind of thing that I would do. And you know, maybe have people call me Bruce, and you know, reduce some of this pomp and you know, ceremony around it. You know, I don't think a senator should be a big deal. I don't think you should have entourages. And I mean, a lot of these folks are really, 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 really out of touch. I mean, Nancy Pelosi on the congressional side, like, I don't know anybody in the public eye that seems that out of touch. Has she, I mean, forget you guys, but like, is she even capable of like sitting down and having a conversation like this, even with people on her own side? I don't think so. I don't see any evidence of it. You know, I see a lot of people that are really, 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 really out of touch. So yeah, I'd like to vote myself out of a job. I don't want to do the job. I don't want to go down there. It's a viper-infested swamp. One thing I looked at was, can you win and just not show up? The answer is no. The Sergeant at Arms of the Senate has the power to compel you, and I believe he has the ability to use federal resources, so I think they can literally make the FBI show up at my farm and
Yeah.
drag me down there, and I think that you may know actually, did that happen a couple times in the 1800s? I think
No.
some senators who didn't feel like showing up, they made them come down.
I think you're
I'd buy
right.
a ticket to
They
that.
should run for the House, there are still,
Yeah.
their Democrat
Yeah.
representatives haven't been there for a year.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Well,
I have 4 beautiful children, and I think I have one of the nicest places in New Hampshire, although this view, boy, oh boy, I mean, I do not have this view. Nobody I've seen in New Hampshire has this view. So,
The people next door.
yeah, true. I don't wanna go down there, I don't wanna go down there and do that, so I would, I resist, being in the swamp. So I wanna reduce the power. I don't wanna go down there and play the politic games, join the board of the Kennedy Center and I'd probably do almost, no meetings. Like, I'm gonna be very, very, very unconventional if I do, just like my campaign has been unconventional. I march by my own beat, I do my own thing. I'm a disruptor. I could care absolutely less than zero about what Mitch McConnell tells me to say, or these political games, or these consultants, and these PACs, and these people say this, and this thing does this, and this handler says that, and absolutely less than zero interest in that. I want to do the bare minimum of what they say. The times that I'm required by law to be there, I'm going to be there, vote no almost every single time on every single thing, and then get the heck out of Dodge. The minute I'm allowed, I'll jump on a plane and go back home and spend the time here. So yeah, I would rather reduce the power. It wouldn't surprise me if I get in trouble down there. I'm a troublemaker. I'm the kind of guy you could expect to see removed from the. I wouldn't have complied with the any vax pass or the mask. Absolutely not. Absolutely zero chance. Mark my words. I promise you, and promise as promise can be, I will never, ever, ever comply with a vax mandate, a vax pass, movement pass, or a mask. If I'm on duty on the Senate floor, they can remove me by police. I could spend the entire 6 years in a cell if I have to. I'm never, ever going to do it. I'm not going to do it. If they want to remove me by police, they can do it. I can sit outside and run my Senate office from the street in front of the Capitol building. I can go back home. I will not comply with these things, ever. Absolutely not. So there's things like that I will be a disruptor on and rock the boat a little bit, and definitely decrease my power. And they may decrease my power. Wouldn't like I said, wouldn't surprise me if I get in trouble. I'm a boat rocker. I'm a disruptor. I'm somebody who's going to go down there and cause trouble. And hopefully, I cause enough trouble that I get in trouble. I hope it's national news, like how bad, And I really, really, really can't emphasize to you how little I care about this job and how little I want the job. I do not care. I do not care. If there's one of these situations like on these Fridays when everybody goes home on a Thursday and they're open for 1 minute, and it will be strategically advantageous to Liberty to do a quorum call and go in there and make everybody wreck their weekend. I don't care. I don't care if everybody hates me. I don't care if they arrest me. I don't care if they run somebody against me in the primary 6 years from now. I don't care about anything like that. I don't even want to be down there. I care about liberty. I care about my family. I care about these principles. And that's what I do. I go down there and do exactly what I say. And I say this to every single group that I meet in New Hampshire. I vote exactly how I say I'm going to vote.
Well, Bruce Fenton, I want to say thank you very much for spending 2 hours with Granite Croc. This has been exactly what I was hoping for, but since you are not the typical Republican that comes through to these gauntlets. So I have enjoyed this.
Great.
I think when we put up the video, there will be a number of liberty and freedom folks that will enjoy listening to this, because we are here not so much for ourselves, but we try to represent our readers as well in these kinds of settings. So thank you very much for coming all the way up here to meet with Granite Croc.
Thank you, and thanks for all you do. I got interviewed by Salon the other day, and it was actually pretty accurate. They meant to be a hit piece talking about guns. They say he wants to take away the gun laws, and I'm like, well, that's good. And so you're doing a service on the other side. You're getting good information to your audience, and that's good. So I commend you guys for what you've done and what you've built. It's really impressive, and you've got your reputation precedes you. So it's my honor to be here. So
We are just a bunch of volunteer misfits for liberty and freedom.
Perfect.
And we don't care who you are. We don't care whether you've got an R, an I, a D, a G, an S, a C. If you violate the US and New Hampshire constitutions and the conservative planks of the NHGOP, we'll come after you. And if you say something, we'll do it again.
Very good. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Grok TV.